继续 Braid 时空幻境的周年重制版，这一期应该有希望把这个 Special Topics 搞完。底下还有一部分，然后右边还有一部分。它这个地方为什么要放一个这个东西？觉得很奇怪。这个真的很奇怪。啊，右边我多那么一点。这时间来得及吗？哦，Kili搞。Designing a trip that needs to take a long time. There and back again. 哦，那应该这个是吧？这一关，然后这一关虽然结束了，哦，这三关是连在一起。Designing a trip.
There and back again is a reference to J. There and back
啊，这看过。
to this. I'm not sure which kind of reference this is.
Right.
For this puzzle to work, the wall must shut before you can make the round trip of getting up to the key and back down to unlock the gate. The wall slams into the floor at around 17 seconds, signaling obvious failure, but already by 13 seconds, you could no longer fit through. So, when we are planning out the level, the path to the key and back must take longer than 13 seconds, preferably around 17 seconds, so that it's very obvious to the player that he didn't almost make it. You can fall faster than you can climb, so an advanced player will drop from the trellises on the way down, and this must be taken into account when determining the travel distance. If you start designing with nothing but the basic idea of you can't get there in time, and you're just trying to think of what the level geometry should be, the simplest way to imagine it is to make the level very, very wide and flat horizontally, so that there's a very obvious long distance that the player must travel. But, as mentioned elsewhere, we generally try to keep levels fitting on one screen when we can for greater understandability. And in this level, that's even more important. If the level were wide and horizontal, the wall would scroll off the screen so you can't see it anymore, and you would have much less certainty about how much time is left and whether you could beat it or not. You'd only know when you got back. For these reasons, the level is authored in a zigzag pattern, fitting on one screen.
Compact puzzle hunt 这看过吗？
Decided early on get somewhere, got to the place, figure out the order and the timing, make you do 17 things.
啊，这看过。
If you know
17 steps 我想起来。
like if it's so,
啊，全部覚えるわけない。
designer you have control over like right? There's
It's
like
good to
some
be a
stuff
game
you just
designer.
look at this incidental difficulty, right?
还能
And
看到
so
两，
early-
对，
and
刚刚是
I'm
2
kinda
分
trying- I wanted a
2分
puzzle
60秒
to fit on a screen because that removes a lot of this incidental difficulty, right?
Right.
So that leads to
compact
designs that are simpler in terms of number of walls and number of rooms and whatever.
Right.
这好像又没听过，好像又听
Decided
过。
early on, but success, but just if
在中间拉一
what
段
is it about puzzles? And there are things that are off visualized yet.
Right.
How much you hint that or whatever.
Right.
But when people realize the puzzle's hard because I'm trying that I was thinking about and I'm kind of trying to remember all these
啊，
elements.
看过。
Right.
That makes a puzzle much harder than I can just look at the screen and see all the things.
Right.
那不妨再看一遍，
We
你这个地方感觉没有别的门进。
decided early on, Braid's a puzzle game. It's
Yep.
not an action game,
Right.
as you just said.
It's not an action game.
What are puzzles like in this universe? Well, they're pretty much, it's hard to get somewhere. And so the goal is get to that place. And the way we indicate that place is by putting a collectible there or a key or something.
Right.
And that's how you know that you successfully got to the place. All right. Now, I think I already, to some degree, although this became further refined as I kept working on the game, but to some degree I knew I wanted puzzles that are relatively simple in the sense that they're not like all a set of 17 steps, and that's what makes them
对，
hard
这句话我
is
是
to
有印象，
figure out the
但别的
order
没
and
什么
the
印象。
timing for the 17 steps. Because
Right.
again, that's probably not about cool time manipulation stuff exactly.
Okay.
Like any game can make you do 17 things in order to solve a puzzle. And once you've solved a couple of those, if it's only about figuring out the order and number of things to do, that just gets boring. Those situations are isomorphic to each other very quickly, right? So I had some sense that it's like I want to focus
我基本能
on
确定
the
这应该
time
听过
stuff. And so I don't want the puzzles to be massively complicated. I want them to be as simple as I can make them while highlighting the cool thing. And again, that became more refined during development, but I believe I had that idea in the beginning. And so once you have that idea, you're like, okay, well, also, what is it about puzzles? Often they're hard, right? What makes a puzzle hard? There's kind of two classes of things. There are things that are on focus to what you're trying to achieve, and there are things that are off focus, right?
On focus and off
Things that are on
focus.
focus that make a puzzle hard is like, well, I'm not used to thinking about time behaving in this way, and there are some consequences of it that I haven't visualized yet.
Right.
So I'm having a hard time solving the puzzle because I don't realize that there's some effect that I could bring to bear.
Right.
And as a designer, you have control over like how much you hint that or whatever.
Right. Right.
But when people realize that it's on topic, it's like, oh, that's what the game's about. Now I understand more about the time thing, right?
Right.
Something that's off topic is, well, this puzzle's hard because I'm trying to think about it. And again, there's a lot of steps, and
Right.
keeping that in my mind like a chess master is very hard for me because I'm not a chess master.
Right. Right.
Another one that I was thinking about very heavily early is I can't see the whole puzzle, right? There's like some stuff off the screen to the left and to the right and up.
Right.
And I'm kind of trying to remember all these elements.
Right.
That makes a puzzle much harder than I can just look at the screen and see all the things.
Right.
And so early on, I had this idea that I wanted a puzzle to fit on a screen because that removes a lot of this incidental difficulty, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So that leads to compact designs that are simpler in terms of number of walls and number of rooms and whatever.
Right.
这个怎么这儿？这个门怎么跑这儿来？来了是啊，这个门在这儿。Tide channels， 这个很可能也看过。看一下啊，那先点吧。
The parameters of this puzzle are somewhat precarious.
Precarious.
If fireballs are too close together or move too quickly,
啊，
it
这
can
可能没看
become
过。
too difficult for the player to prevent the monster from being killed because the required timing is too tight and too tweaky. In a puzzle game like this, it could be very bad for basic playability if the player tries the right thing, the actual intended solution to the puzzle, but he fails because of tweaking its
对。
factors. When this
这个
happens,
是个
he
比较
might
糙的。
conclude that he's not trying the right approach and instead go try other things that are totally wrong and put him off on the wrong track for a long time. Also, hey, it is just less fun to try to solve a very spammy puzzle. So, we want the fireballs to be kind of slow and far apart. But if the fireballs are slow and far apart, it's easier for the player to solve the puzzle accidentally, because the windows for the monster to inhabit are so big that accidental rewinds can get the monster out. That's why this upper platform is so long. We're minimizing the chances of an accidental solve. This causes the platform to extend off the screen to the left, and you have to start the solution by standing near the puzzle piece where you can't see the cannon and monster. But I actually liked the off-screen aspect of this puzzle in this case. It's one of the rare exceptions where we want you to reason about stuff that's off-screen, the other major ones being movement by degrees, movement amplified, and World 5's lair. Initially, the player is likely to be just focused on getting the monster through the fireballs. When he finally does this, he's unlikely to end up in a place where he can bounce off the monster to get the puzzle piece. But getting the monster through the fireballs confirms without a doubt that the player has executed a major portion of the solution. He can then work on a version 2 solution that ends with him in the right place. This kind of partial solvability is a good
Partial
property for a
solvability
puzzle to have. It helps players know when they're making progress,
解
and
决
it
了一
helps
部
them
分。
feel good about that progress because they can fit it into a mental framework along with where they've been and where they're trying to go. Sometimes puzzles can feel unfun and
放很
unfair
浪
when
费。
there's no way to get traction on them with a partial solve. At the same time, though, sometimes I do deliberately design puzzles that way, such as the high jump puzzle. And there's another example of partial solvability over here.
这兔子好烦呢、总算干掉了。这个应该没看过。
There are several parameters of this puzzle that are interdependent. Firstly, because we're asking the player to set up the cannonballs striking each other, those cannonballs must be moving slowly enough that the player could at least try to aim. We don't want it to degenerate into the player just continuously pressing rewind with no idea whether he is close or far from a solution and just hoping to get lucky. That's not fun or interesting. In order for the collisions to continue happening once you set them up, it's necessary for the horizontal cannon to be firing at a multiple of the rate of the diagonal cannon. The simplest and clearest rate for this puzzle is 2, so the horizontal cannon shoots twice as fast as the diagonal. If we were to make the horizontal cannon fire faster than that, we increase our chances of an accidental solve because there are a lot more targets for the diagonal cannon to accidentally hit. We'd like to reduce chances of an accidental solve down close to 0, but because the cannonballs have to have big enough radii that it's not too tweaky to make them hit each other, and also because of the distance constraints we'll talk about next, it did not seem possible to eliminate the possibility of an accidental solve, so that does happen at a somewhat high rate on this puzzle. But here I don't mind it so much relative to other puzzles because at least players get to see a cool new phenomenon of the cannonballs hitting each other. Regarding the distance constraints, over here on the right-hand side, it needs to be impossible to get to the puzzle piece when no cannonballs are colliding. And it needs to be impossible by enough of a margin that the player doesn't think he's almost making it. The fastest way to start running up this corridor is to climb to the top of the ladder first and then drop off horizontally just behind a fireball. So we have to make sure that even if an expert player does this, he still can't make it in time. On the other hand, we need to make sure that the puzzle is executable with a comfortable margin, even by players who are not going to do the drop-down trick and instead are climbing up more slowly from below. If we make this puzzle too tweaky and hard, it becomes especially frustrating because when the player dies and rewinds, he'll mess up the cannonball collision timing and he has to go back and set that up again, every time. But there's no way to avoid that given this particular puzzle design, so we just endeavor to make the spacing of the cannonballs more comfortable.
Movement by degrees. 这跑这儿来。
Movement by degrees. So, you know, the first part is kind of tricky, but it's sort of clear what to do. Now we're really having to deal with a mixture of rewindable and non-rewindable things, except now the non-rewindable things mean things that trundle forward in time, whether we move left or right or not. And so we have to deal with that, and it's fun. By the way, I like the art on this world too. The sort of, you know, you see all these childhood things in the background. And of course, it's very nice that the snow falls up whenever we're moving to the left.
Took some doing.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Why not just run the code backwards? I don't understand.
Anywho.
So then the hard part, of course, here is dealing with the 3 cacti later on. For me, it took several tries because I was like, oh, wait, okay, I see what I have to do. There's a couple places in the game where I felt like, okay, I need to build up a time bank, right? I need to sit somewhere for a while until I have enough to rewind, because you can't rewind into things that haven't happened yet. And so I did that, and then I realized I needed to do the fast rewind to move to the left quickly enough, or at least that's what I thought. And it took me a couple tries. And then, of course, after doing that, I worked a lot harder to get 2 monsters onto the platform so I could get up a little bit higher to the ultra super secret places, and that was fun.
啊，他一个就能上去了。
Platform so I could get up a little bit higher to the ultra super secret places.
我操，真的假的？
And that was fun.
Right on.
Yeah, of course, it's also, as you say, when you're to the right down there, the third cactus is like just sitting there up. And I remember feeling like, well, when does it go down? The question is where?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we're in this world.
And that's just a kind of neat, like, by this point in the game, you've done that enough that that's not new, but it's still a little bit, it's a slightly different permutation of that than you've had to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
对，这个应该没听过。他这个评论组合还真是复杂。这个居然突然变成 movement amplify， 这个感觉也行啊。
Movement Amplified. Is that another novel title?
No, I mean,
It makes sense in this level.
it was where this came from was these 2 levels. I was originally thinking of them as being kind of parallel to each other, and they
Right.
ended up maybe not so much.
Well, when you get on the cloud train here, including
Yeah.
this first pair of cloud trains.
Cloud train，
Yes.
Again, so for me at least, for the style of games that I like, this was another one of these wonderful moments where it's like, oh, so is this a new object? Like, is this a super fast conveyor belt? Because you find those sometimes in games, right?
Oh yeah.
But no, it's the same engine following the same rules. It's just that there's a little bit of a recursion here where, well, you're standing on some moving clouds. As time changes, the clouds move, but that makes time change more. And it's also kind of confusing at first, right? That it speeds it up going in either direction. But think about it, it makes sense. If you're running the clouds backwards, they move farther to the left, which means faster backwards. And if you move to the right, they're moving faster to the right, which makes time go faster.
Yes.
And I hope I said that right.
There is also a technical note about this and how it was programmed and why that's the right math. Yeah.
Right. When you realize that this is following from the same physics and the same engine, again, using the word physics somewhat broadly,
Sure.
for me, there's a real pleasure in that because, you know, if every new puzzle has a new widget with new behavior, well, maybe that's not the right way to make more variety. You know, maybe it's nice to have the variety emerge from the rules. So I really enjoyed both these cloud trains and the next one. And of course, this was a little bit tricky, and I thought at first I had to do something else. It's a nice fact that the key rolls back toward you if you screw up.
Yeah. So here I brought back the left-right gate, right? But
Right, but is there any way to...
no,
Yeah, we can't ever use
it's
the
just
right gate.
it's more like a callback to the earlier part of
Right.
the game, right? In case you'd forgotten about it, about your poor performance in that episode, we bring it back.
And so then we have another one of these things again, amplified by time. We have this nice moment. We have to jump on it, even though it's off camera, but it's okay. We know it's going to be there in time to catch us, and there it is. And we can just barely make it onto the next platform.
Which, I mean, really, that's the kind of leap of faith in the game,
Right.
honestly, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's nice.
不是，这里怎么还有一个 Infinite Series？ 怎么突然变成2只了？累。这个应该看过了。这下边 Cloud Design， 呀，这个越近越复杂了。Holy fuck！ 啊，对，干不了了是吧 ？Infinite Series。 这个是这儿 ，Infinite Series 是这儿，这个呢 ，Cloud Design。Holy shit！ 啊，这是另外一个专辑了，是吧？有必要先看掉吗？ 我觉得到时候应该也会有门过来的吧。这个东西现在看着感觉很麻烦 ，Infinite Series。然后这个 Infinite Series 现在跑到这儿了，还好乱设计。两个 Infinite Series， 相当于互相 reference， 回都回不去，他妈的！啊，那个地方 back 能回去。
In this world, time moves as you move. You move to the right. If you're walking,
这看过了。
we'll find as we get to some weirds, and that was. There are also some technical issues involved in making this all happen, doing the programming and working out the math that are pretty interesting.
是吗？那这个是这儿，这个居然不共存呢。
Programming world 4 so that these clouds would work. Time matches the Braid plays around, but as explained, riding on to move, run many simulation steps, require the computer to
geometrics
decrease. Fortunately, we don't have speeds of the objects.
Geometric series.
Reasonable steps. We'll cover the exact math for this in the next part.
这个其实看过了 ，Cloud Design Infinity Series， 这个没了吧？对，这个是 Infinity Series。然后这个 back 是那儿的 back。
Movement and
Thinking of that
class persons
and how it was
again both the and it's okay. We know it's going to be there.
Leap of Faith， 杀下一个 layer。Yeah， 这兔子真的很烦的，每一次都会重新刷出来。在这个地方放这五官是有点脏的。Layer。
So then there's this fun layer puzzle. So, again, kind of like there's a hunt in a bunch of worlds, there's a lair in a bunch of worlds, and it's kind of the same and it's kind of different. Now we have to use this mechanic of sending our shadow to knock down the chandelier, or at least that helps a lot, because this guy is not rewind immune. On the other hand, because he lives in both universes, both I and my shadow can bonk him. There's a lot of sending the shadow to bring down the chandelier, and lo and behold, we get another hit off the guy. I tried to lure the boss over to the side so that he would be under the shadow chandelier. I never quite got that right.
这个很烦
I also tried to get both chandeliers to fall on him. Anyway, I didn't end up achieving any double taps. I just sent my shadow in 5 times, and
yeah. Well, that works.
Every once in a while, I undid a tap by going back because I got fireballed and whatever. And then the other nice thing about this puzzle is we see this really stretched journey that we have to send our shadow on. I take it that the journey we have to send him on is kind of at the outer limits of how long the branch can be.
Yeah, that was the idea here, is put the lever very far to the left and the door very far to the right, and you can't really do it from the right end of the level because he doesn't last that long. You kind of need to start here, maybe somewhere in the middle, go up, do the thing, right? Pull the lever.
You each have a job to do, and you both have to start from that place somewhere in the middle. And I think that took me a try or two, but it was, it was pleasing because this is kind of the first point where we need to ride up against that limit on his life expectancy or branching time or whatever it is.
Yeah, design-wise, this is again one of those things where there's puzzle tolerances in mind, like how slowly does the door go up, how long does it stay open and shut.
Sure.
And the tolerances are actually, as a designer, they're very easy here because there's no constraint really pushing it the other way, which is nice. Unlike the other ones I've been talking about. On this one, it's just like, well, there's nothing requiring me to make it either long or short. I just have complete freedom about picking it. You can be pretty relaxed about where in the middle you decide to do this from.
Right. It's interesting. So in some of these puzzles,
yes,
the design had a very narrow window.
Yes.
In a couple of them, the execution for the player is twitchy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like twitchy runtime and twitchy compile time or something?
I don't know.
Twitchy coding
I
time?
certainly didn't think about that at the time.
Yeah.
High jump, crossing the gap. 这个就是 high jump.
What do you think of the idea of making it more obvious that it's about a monster jumping on your head? Like maybe, yeah.
No, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say a couple things to start that I'm sure you've heard me say, but then maybe we can get into something interesting new, right? So firstly, a puzzle is something you might not solve, right? So Like that's what makes it a challenge, is because if I don't do a good job, I won't be able to solve the puzzle, right? And some people take this attitude. Like I hate puzzle games where like 10 seconds after you enter the level, it says, "Oh, you haven't gone that far yet. Let me give you a hint." Like those timers are always set so short whenever people do that. It drives me nuts, right? I have heard specifically the rationale that we want everybody to be able to finish the game and solve all the main, and maybe there's some hard puzzles off to the side, but we want everybody to finish this game. And to me, that's not really a puzzle game anymore, because the depth of appreciation depends on how hard you actually thought about it, or how much, let's not even use the word hard. Like, how deeply did you think about what's happening in this level? How much did you run through permutations in your mind about what could be interesting about it? Then you come out of it with an appreciation. And the more that you just see the answer and do it, the less that happens, right? And so, well, okay, to get back to your actual question, I just like the magic that I see in that puzzle. And part of the magic, like I said, is from going from this is impossible to I see how to do this. If I tell you how it's possible, not even how to do it, but if I say, oh, this, imagine the little dinosaur showed up and said, try to get the monster to bounce off your head, right? That's the stupid version of it. I could put a sign saying, beware of falling monsters or something. Right?
Can I just stop you?
I know you wouldn't do this. You wouldn't do
No,
this.
but I'm like, okay, maybe a compromise is you make a little pit where the monster has to fall on your head, and it's right before this puzzle, so it kind of gives you a hint without actually like giving you the answer, and it puts more in your mind, because like in the Witness you do all these things where it's like a build-up of the idea, and here you could conceivably say that that's a possibility.
I guess, I mean, honestly, I didn't think about it that hard at the time because I just loved what I came up with. But if I were to think about it now, okay. So you mentioned before, we have these little cubby holes that the monsters walk into and get a key. That's sort of like, at some point, it's a visual shorthand in this game of like, you have to get a monster to this point. And we don't have that many other ways to require a monster to be somewhere. There's not pressure plates even or anything in this game. You could design a puzzle. Okay, like you said, you go down in a pit and a monster can come out of a cannon and you can re-stomp him and he comes out again. And maybe he's going right to left. He falls down in the pit. And then if you stand in the right place, he'll bounce off your head onto a little bit of a platform to make it an easy thing to hit. And then the platform like goes into one of the little cubby holes and he gets a key out for you. Okay, that would be an okay puzzle, probably, because it wouldn't be totally obvious. But that wouldn't feel magical to me, that puzzle. It would be more like, oh, okay, I see what I have to do here. It would be a little bit cool and magical because as you do have to use your rewind guy to do that. And that's neat, right? Like, it's essentially the same puzzle as the harder one, but with more things, which makes it not as good because there's like a key. That there also has to be a gate somewhere. So there's a gate that gets you to the part of the level that has the harder thing on it, right? But that's, one of the reasons why I do video games and like puzzle video games and games with trippy ideas and mechanics and themes and whatever is like I just have some aesthetic that I like of transcending normal everyday human understanding, right? Of like observing some true thing or beautiful thing that is normally quite far away from us. Like imagine you can't space travel, but there's something just really far away off in some part of the universe where you can't even understand, but you figure out how to go there or see it or something. It's something like that. And this World 5 puzzle, the one that actually exists that we've been talking about, is like that to me. It's like far away, but you can get there in an instant, right? It's not a lot of steps. Now, the version that has the cubby hole and the key and the pit, that other puzzle, in making it easier, it is more encumbered and more Earth-like, more earthy. It's not, it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not magical and transcendent. And then also, in the process of solving the harder one, you're not making as big of a leap, because we brought you, now there's a space station somewhere, and okay, you went off to some mildly new place, but like we sort of also provided some resources in the middle for you to like stock up and hang out, and like that's good if you want an easier game, but it does remove the magic for me. And this is not me saying that I think harder is better always, but harder is better sometimes. Or even harder, I don't even think harder is the operative thing here, because this puzzle is kind of hard, but if I could make it easier without sacrificing other parts of it, I probably would somehow. I just don't know how to do that, right? And then, as we mentioned a minute ago, if it's too easy, then maybe it's not good because your mind didn't engage with it.
哼，还挺难的，我操。哦，这个应该看过了 ，back 过得过不去，需要从这儿过去。这里的 back 是到这儿的。
Mark suggested making the puzzle easier by hinting that you need to make a monster bounce off your head. Here's the idea I came up with during that discussion. It works, but it's pretty ugly because of the weird geometry and the way the player is almost trapped. Mark suggested making the puzzle easier by hinting that you need to make a monster bounce off your head. Here's the idea I came up with during that discussion. It works, but it's pretty ugly because of the weird geometry and the way the player is almost trapped on the left side of the level. In the rest of the game, you can just walk to the next level anytime you're stuck, except, of course, in the boss levels, where being locked in is part of the drama. So locking the player in here on a normal level is really not great. Not only because we're blocking the player's ability to experiment, but because we're diluting the uniqueness of the boss levels. One way that puzzle games end up being mediocre is when designers make stuff like this and just decide, hey, it's good enough. To really produce high-quality work, you want to notice ugliness like this when it happens.
Ugliness.
To see all this weighty stuff has been added to the level just to make an excuse to bounce a monster, and then ask yourself, can't I find a more elegant way to do this? Then you could try different ideas in your mind or in the level editor and judge to yourself whether they're becoming uglier or more beautiful. Every good puzzle designer I know practices this aesthetic sense in some way. The good news is that there isn't an objectively correct answer, which means you can develop your own personal voice and style. But without some strong idea of what's good that is reality-based to some degree, you won't really be able to make good puzzles.
partial solving.
This puzzle is a very to lock player fun like
这很多都已经看过的，后面都想不起来，已经看过。
back up to it. By the time the player gets to this point, he knows he's hot on the trail to fully solving the puzzle, so he's probably in a good mood. This extra step provides a little extra surprise at the end that the player is unlikely to foresee, and that adds a little bit more enjoyment, at least.
At least, hopefully. 妈，我连回都回不去，这要怎么回去啊？那个都已经看过了。Determining how quickly some fireballs should move and how close together they should be。对，应该这个地方，五官都已经出来了。这个就是 Tie Channel 这个地方是 Tie Fireball rates and distance constraints。原来如此。它这个 reference 进进出出传送门设计的太复杂了。
There are and it needs the other if we make it every time. But there's no way to avoid that given this particular puzzle design, so we just endeavor to make the spacing of the cannonballs more comfortable.
这个算是 comfortable， 就这样。OK， 刚好来得及。叽里叽里 no 叽里叽里了。Wide tolerances on a wide level 这可能就是刚刚那东西。这个是连在一起的。
So then there's the
原来如此。
which is nice.
In a couple of them, the execution for
Twitchy.
the player is twitchy. Is that like twitchy runtime and twitchy compile time or something?
I don't know.
Twitchy coding
I
time?
certainly didn't think about that
At the time.
Yeah.
What makes some puzzles good and other puzzles bad?
What makes some puzzles
好长。
good and other puzzles bad? I refined my views on this topic extensively after Braid was finished, so what I'll say here isn't fully demonstrated inside Braid, but Braid shows you an early stage in the development of this style of design. A puzzle works well when you as the player have a clear goal. You know what you're trying to do, generally, and it just seems non-obvious how to accomplish that goal. You think about this and that for a while trying to solve the puzzle, and you aren't flailing around trying random ideas, but instead you have a good sense of what's relevant and what's not, so you're able to make forward progress over time. In the most tangible case, you can make forward progress in your spatial position on the level, but if not, at least you're making progress in your mind. The to-do list of things to figure out is getting checked off. And when you get to the idea that's key to the solution, before you even try that idea, you know it's right, or at least you know that it's highly relevant. The mental process is crisp. Most designers just think of puzzle games as a series of difficulty challenges and don't care about the actual ideas so much. But I don't think that leads to compelling puzzles. To me, the idea behind a puzzle is a piece of nonverbal communication that, when received by the player, can be surprising and delightful, and receiving a stream of continuous elaborated ideas can be one of the primary reasons that you would play a game. Because of this, I think it's best when the physical act of solving a puzzle is not so hard once you have the right idea. If you have to keep trying to execute the idea over and over, say you keep missing super difficult jumps, this can be anticlimactic because you had this beautiful moment where you realized the idea, but that realization was not yet acknowledged by the game, because the way the game acknowledges your idea is when you win the level. But instead you're doing a bunch of frustrating, grindy jump attempts, or performing a bunch of routine object manipulations, which is really not the good part of the puzzle. It takes much longer to get to the end, and when you do, the acknowledgement of your finding the idea has been delayed so long the impact is perhaps no longer very strong. The emotional tenor of the level has changed. Maybe you don't even remember how nice the idea was anymore, you just remember how annoying that jump was. That's if you even get to the idea. But difficulty in execution can dilute understanding of the puzzle and of the game as a whole because it introduces confusion that makes the ideas harder to see. Lastly, if the overall difficulty level makes it slower to proceed through individual puzzles, this affects pacing of the game as a whole. You could be giving players a dense experience where they see delightful ideas one after the other every 15 minutes maybe, but if instead they only see one nice idea every 2 hours, and this idea is tinged with the agony of difficult execution, the game will feel very different, much slower, much less meaty. That said, if puzzles are too easy, they easily go unappreciated. The mental effort required to solve the puzzle is very helpful in that it causes the player to turn the ideas over in his mind to really look at them from all angles. But since games reward material progress, that's what players are pushing for. So if you make it possible for the player to just sleepwalk through the solution and win without appreciating anything, he probably will. And that's bad, because if the player doesn't see the individual ideas, he's not only missing out on these little demonstrations of individual beauty, but he's also missing the higher level flow of ideas from puzzle to puzzle. These days, when I make puzzle games, I like to orchestrate the flow of ideas into longer paragraphs or constellations so that the player can see and appreciate the relationships between the ideas. Braid is not so deliberate about this because I was just learning. But later games lean heavily on this higher level idea flow. If pacing is too slow, it's harder to see the flow and appreciate the larger pattern, just like it's harder to enjoy music that is slowed down by a factor of 10. And if individual ideas are too unclear, that's like trying to listen to a recording of a conversation where many of the sentences are too garbled to understand. You may be able to kind of piece together what the conversation is about, but it's an artificial experience that is much less enjoyable than if you could understand all the sentences naturally. So to recap, in general, and there are exceptions, for a game like this, a good puzzle is probably not super easy and obvious, but also on average not brutally hard. It gives you a topic to think about so you can have clear ideas about how to solve the puzzle. Upon confirming that a particular idea is correct, not being needlessly foiled by execution, you get to the goal. And you didn't just arbitrarily win the puzzle, but rather the puzzle gave you some clear understanding of what the point was, what this level is about. And this idea weaves into the tapestry of the game's ideas as a whole. And this increase in your appreciation helps give you a sublime feeling. Bad puzzles, then, are puzzles that don't achieve these objectives. You start the level, and you don't really know what the goal is exactly. You're just muddling through, trying random things. Maybe you can't see what's in the level
这个
clearly,
就很没意思。
or only a small part of the level is visible at once, so you can't clearly think about it, or there are too many steps to think about and you just get lost. Maybe you're trying random things and hoping for success, trying to brute force your way through puzzles, and when you finally do the thing that the game wanted, that winning action felt arbitrary or random or tedious.
Right.
Maybe you even solved the puzzle
By mistake.
The puzzle feels like a waste of time. Maybe you just feel tired at the end. Lots of puzzle games are like this. As designers, we have the high-level goal to pick basic parameters of our game to support the creation of good puzzles and avoid situations that generate bad puzzles.
这也看过了。
The idea for this is a can't cross. Much enough to play upon first game. His platform. Why this is to dispel all doubt immediately. So maybe it should have been
a little bit
a
wider.
little bit wider.
Constraints that determine the behavior of the ring so that it would be good for gameplay. The pit. 这个居然是 the pit。啊，原来这边是连在一起的。这几关是连在一起的。The pit.
When we're sitting down to design a game, we get to decide everything about how it works. So, we have the high-level idea that there should be an object you could drop to slow down time. How do we decide exactly how it should behave, down to every detail?
这感觉没听过。
The game was inspired by strange phenomena created by the laws of physics, and more specifically, the slowdown effect was inspired by time
哦，
dilation
好像
that
好像
happens
看
at
过。
very high speeds.
啊，看过。
A simple map
对，看过。靠，我都没印象。
and
你数量实在太多了。
from the radius is without it, I wanted
这
the
游戏
ring
说
to
我
be
看
as
过，我都不记得我看过。
zero, which makes
あ、对对对，这これはさすがに見る。 見たことあるね。
One is what would actually zero, which makes the slowdown constant inside the radius. Here's the code from the game that actually implements this. You can imagine how you might like to change this behavior and what the consequences would be.
Right. Gap width. Oh. The shape of the platform in the key passing level. 靠，这还不是一个。
Here we show various versions.
啊，这看过。Gap width 就是刚刚的地方是吧？怎么又这儿？哈，不是吧？这个确实搞得太复杂。
This is the version of the puzzle that's
这也
present
看
in
过
the
了。
released game. But the solution is even more obvious here because the key is in a small area with a wall to the right. So the only possible way the key could go is to the left. In the actual game, the key is located in a puzzle by jump solve the instant where the key most can be. You could think of this extra rule as being a tiny blemish on the puzzle
blemish.
design. But given that the active reality already feels more important than the shadow reality, this rule may seem unsurprising to the player if he thinks clearly about it at all, which most players won't. This is the first through the little different thing to recognize, but just for this puzzle, and we'll never see it elsewhere. I try to avoid this kind of thing in my designs because when you do this a lot, it makes the game feel weighted down and ugly.
Just out of reach. The full set of constraints on this puzzle made it seemingly impossible to perfect. 太复杂了。
The core idea
这我觉得也是看过的。
It's absolutely how puzzle accepts negative monster to get the key. you end up killing the monster again to climb up to the puzzle piece. I like that just walking toward the exit door from the beginning, you see the monster go into the tunnel not far from the keep, and you see that if you could only continue rightward, he would get that key, but you're blocked here by this wall. The room up here with the puzzle piece makes a good excuse to have a higher platform from which to jump to the left. This nub on the left looks kind of like a wall, or just a stopper to help bound the area, but at the same time it's obviously a flat area you can jump on, so this part of the solution feels completely fair. As I iterated toward a final puzzle design, I liked the idea that the player keeps looping through this central space in various directions. This pattern makes the puzzle a little more beautiful to me. There is a subtle piece of aesthetics that I don't think most players would notice consciously, but games are felt more strongly when these are in there. And after all, even with the unintended solution, the level did successfully embody its core idea of resetting things by crossing over them and back, though this might be hard for some players to see through the mess.
太难了 ，see through the mess。OK。我去，这样底下的部分算搞定了。戻りましょうか。这要在讨论 speed run 是吗？about the speed run.
So you have speed runs and you have challenge times.
Yeah.
How did you come up with those times?
I played them myself and saw how fast I could go, and then I made the times like easier than I could do by some percent.
That's it.
Because I figure, like, look, you know, as a developer, you're really good at the game from playing it all the time. You can't, like, in order to pass a challenge meant for a lot of people, you can't expect them to be as good as you because you're sitting there in front of the game all the time, right? Simultaneously, the best person in the world will probably be better than you because they'll spend all the time grinding on it. And so you just want to keep that in mind, and you want to pick something that's pretty reasonable. Now, there was one additional, well, okay. So it's not just about what are the times, but, you know, there are several single level speedruns and then a full game speedrun. And when it comes to the single level speedruns, those levels were chosen by picking levels where you could make a substantially faster time if you figure something out about how to do it. So it's not just 100% twitch, but like, oh, if I do this specific thing, it's an efficient way to proceed through the level. And so it was something about encouraging deeper understanding of those levels, right? That was the real reason they were picked. And then, of course, the full game speedrun covers that for the whole game.
So when a person does it in 18 minutes, does it surprise you? Do you ever watch them and like you see something they did that you never thought of, or has that happened?
It's hard to remember. I mean, the main thing I remember last time I watched one of these, which was probably a little slower. I think I remember
对，差不多这东西
or something. You know, there's some jumping off a ladder glitch that you're not supposed to be able to do that people figured out. And I did sort of expect things like that, but at the same time, I did feel like the game was fundamentally
broken,
mostly robust in a way more so than other games are. So you see all these games where they like glitch out of the map and
right.
and like land somewhere else, and I was pretty sure that for the most part people wouldn't be able to do that.
对，
And that seems to
他的意思就是这个问题其实经常有人考虑，就 speed run 的这个社群对于开发者来说究竟怎么样的存在？我看到的评价是，对于大多数这种能够 speed run TA 的游戏，开发者其实整体是不在乎，要么就中间，要么就趋向于反感，就比较少嘛。就比较少的这个游戏的开发者是比较鼓励玩家去 speed run，为什么呢？就是因为这种什么 glitch exploit， 你基本上看到那些速通，是吧？大多数速通都是 any percent， 就没有写 glitchless。如果是 glitchless 的话，你是不能 spam 任何这个不太正常的思路的。但这里呢又有讨论的，比如说像当时早年马里奥跳关什么，可以从第2还是第3世界、第4世界。第1还是第2世界跳到第4世界，第4世界跳到第8世界，那这个设计是开发者给你设计好的， 对吧？它就设计在那边，这是在关卡里面有的。那这个东西能不能算 glitchless？我觉得可以，但不同玩家看法可能不一样。但是有一种看法是绝对算 glitch，就是你开发者都不知道这个思路可以，是吧？你卡墙壁，突然卡墙壁卡进去了，掉下去了，突然通关了啊！这种就所谓的，它是算 glitch 通关的，它是 any percent 通关就没有任何的限制，没有要求什么不能用 bug，不能用 glitch，所以经常你能看到这种所谓的 speed run 都是通过这种方式的，比如说穿墙，比如说本来应该需要打这关的，然后你莫名其妙就可以跳了，莫名其妙拿到钥匙，或者说不拿到钥匙就能开门，就是这种思路。而他刚刚想表达的意思，就至少这个游戏的 speed run 暂时看起来最 glitch 的就是那种像刚刚提到的跳跃 glitch 嘛，你跳到那个一个平台的边缘，你可以获得一段非常小的加速，这种加速是小的嘛，但对于 speed run 来说，确实能变得更快，这是他觉得非常少见的 glitch，因为否则你要见过别的一些，尤其是开放世界游戏、开放世界大地图3D 的游戏，我发现那些游戏的 speed run，我相信相当一部分玩家跟我一样，应该是不能理解这种，就你去就这个开发 glitch 是吧？去发现那些比如说能穿墙，靠这些手段去速通得到一个成绩，这个成绩有什么价值吗？这个完全取决于你对 speed run， 你对这个 glitch 的一个价值观判断。如果你觉得时间才是一切，那么这些 glitch 啊什么的，反正规则限制写的是 any percent 是吧？那就任何方法都是可以的，只要你通关，只要你够快，那就可以。这是一种看法。另外一种看法是你这么通关，就跟开了个 cheat 开了挂好像也没有什么区别。
Still be true. So I'm not super surprised. At the same time, if you had asked me, what do you think is going to be the world record time? I would have picked faster than 18 minutes, probably.
Okay.
I don't remember what my time was. I feel like my time was 24 minutes. I think it's set to 35 or something.
45.
It's 45. Okay.
Okay, so easy.
Then I think my time was probably, yeah, it might have been 24. I don't know.
那已经很快了。
I'm not sure how it would be if I did it now.
That's a pretty gracious, I guess extended time.
但其实还是很难。
The individual levels, I think it's the phase shift one that's set to 26 seconds.
I don't know. We could go look at the times, but they're all chosen by how fast could I do it and then add time. But, you know, the full game is a little bit different because it's so long that you can't expect people to really be perfect.
它应该是砸了相当多的时间，
And so
所以方差必须要更
it
大。
has even more time added for those purposes.
这是对的，
kind of mess
但
up
还是
a
很
little
难。
more.
这个
Because
45
it's
分钟
so
还是
big
很
and
难。
you didn't memorize everything. Now you still will lose if you just absolutely haven't figured out a puzzle again, or you completely forgot it, right? Because you can easily spend 10 minutes trying to figure out one puzzle. But if you basically remember all the solutions, there is a lot of slack for mistakes in the full game.
容错率还是有。
So I think of the speed runs as being different in that way. Like the single level speed runs are about really perfecting that level.
对的。
And the full game speed run is more
不
like,
犯大错就行了。
do you have a comprehensive understanding of the game such that you can make it in this time? But that's, you know, this is always my policy about speed runs. So there's a
他还有
different
policy
thing in The
about speed
Witness,
run.
but that's broadly a similar idea where there's timing involved and a time limit. And I was doing
讲道理，这款游戏是否应该追加这个 speed run 的系统本身就有争议。他追加这个东西，就说明这个开发者对这东西一定是认可的。在1到5里面，你是非常厌恶有这样的开发者，非常讨厌这种设计，就自己的游戏被这帮你基本可以讲 speed run 疯狗拿来刷，去 exploit 这种 glitch， 去开发这种 bug， 在他们看来是非常痛恨的行为。他很明显是正向的，起码在1到5里面应该是4吧，起码是4，他自己都能冲这个东西冲到24分钟，说明他是支持的东西。
an interview with Giant Bomb, like right when the game came out, and they were like kind of skeptical that I could do it because, you know, it was thought of as pretty hard. So I was like, all right, you got a PlayStation 4 here, let me do it. I usually play mouse and keyboard, but I'll do it on the gamepad. And I proceeded to do it in under the time limit, like right there on the interview. But I stopped right before solving the final puzzle because I didn't want to give him the platinum trophy for free. So I did not complete the thing. Yeah.
紧张。 像这种平台游戏包括一些精确游戏，或者说概括一下，没有什么 RNG 因素，基本上没有，或者说完全没有 RNG 因素的这类游戏呢，我觉得 speedrun 是可以理解的。有些 RNG 因素非常高的游戏，我真不知道是 speedrun 是干了什么，有什么意义？就比如说你需要研究一个思路啊，你可以求稳，但你求稳就不是 speedrun， 对吧？你求稳的话，你相当于是主动的减慢了自己的速度，然后去达到一个高的成功率，这肯定不是想要的。而 speedrun 就刚好相反，它是最终上限，只要能提升速度就要追求。那么这里刚好给你一个人民币，是吧？比如说这个地方我就需要50%的概率抽中的东西，没有抽中，你这次 speedrun 就毁了，这是个什么样的感觉？所以 RNG 因素很强的游戏，我是觉得 speedrun 我真是不能理解，你是图什么东西去搞的？平台动作无所谓 ，Guardrail， 因为它没有什么随机性嘛，包括什么像马里奥赛这种即时赛，它把随机性的东西全部给你拔掉了。你这一次跑跟你下一次跑几乎是完全一样的，这样的这个东西你去反复的练习是有意义的，是吧？你不停的精进，不停学研究思路是可以的，而不是说每次打开这东西情况都不一样，那他妈去搞东西，那就变成抽副本的游戏了。啊，这个就下不去了。哦，那就是拿到钥匙之后卡回来了，应该能回来了。我应该是能回来的，对，卡进去了。Guardrails。啊，这样就不行。这不过是一种玩法而已 ，speedrun 它只是一种玩法。现在虽然这个群体越来越庞大了，核心原因啊，我并不觉得是因为，能够接受这个 speedrun 的概念的玩家变多了，我纯粹是因为玩家总基数变多，我是这么看的。我相信绝大部分玩家，你要按照比率上来说的话，还是不算特别大，就这个社群人变多，是因为总的游戏玩家变多了，居然过不去了吗？这个居然过不去。啊，这样可以了。跳一下去蹦一下，这里就需要利用好这个东西了。啊，这样就不行了。我操，这个操作还挺烦的嘛。啊，你还不能过分的 rewind 是吧？你现在已经悬空了呢。可以了，这个应该算是4或者5吧。再看他怎么讨论。下一个 about speedruns， 他能打到24分钟，这个是真的不得了。
I've said elsewhere that Braid was designed mostly not to be an action game in order not to interfere with the crispness of the puzzles. On the other hand, once you finish the game, we have speed runs, and the speed runs seem to be all about doing levels in a tweaky, actiony way. So isn't this a contradiction?
我也这么觉得。
Well, not really. The speed runs do require clean execution, but they are there to test your understanding of the puzzles in the game. Maybe you fumbled through some puzzles or guessed or brute forced something. You can't do that when the clock is ticking, so you need to refine and clean up your understanding of the game, which is nice. The single-level speedruns all take place on levels where there's a clean thing to figure out that reduces your time a great deal. So the single-level speedruns are about the puzzles ultimately, even though the mechanism by which they work is action and timing. The full game speedrun is more of a grand challenge. The timing is not so tight, so much more execution failure is permitted, but it's easy to have forgotten the solutions to a few puzzles, and having to stand around re-solving something is enough to sink your run. So the full game speedrun is a way of evaluating whether you understand and remember everything in the game.
这是变相增加了你通关之后的游戏时间了。本身就是一个这个 post game content， 因为此类解谜向的游戏，当你知道怎么干了之后，就已经没有什么重玩价值非常低的。这跟动作游戏刚好相反，你解谜就是你出题，我给你答案，是吧？不知道答案，那我需要花点时间。如果我知道答案，你这个问题再问我就没有什么意义了。Puzzle clarity， 啊，这个是这儿是吧？我靠，夹的这么紧 ，gap width， 怪不得。我操 ，puzzle clarity。把这个看掉，这期我觉得差不多了。时间上来说，我靠，你这都搞不定，长他妈是有点长的。
There are some interesting things to say about where the reprise levels came
reprises.
from. Way back
from
my start as a professional video game maker, when just hanging around developer conferences, I'd heard some designer friends speak enthusiastically about games where you can revisit old levels with new abilities and navigate those levels in a different way than you had before. For example, now that you have a grappling hook, you can transit a level more quickly and get to some new places that you couldn't when you initially played it and were only able to jump. I don't actually remember which games were being discussed. Maybe they were Mario or Metroid games. But they were mostly games I hadn't played. But this stuck in my mind as an interesting thing to do in a game design. Later, when I was designing Braid, all these ideas bubbled up. But Braid doesn't work by your character getting new abilities over the course of the game. The abilities, such as they are tied to each world. And since the abilities are tied to worlds, it's not possible to actually go back to the same level with different abilities. So I flipped the idea around and had the same levels recur in different places, wherever I felt the mechanics of the new world made the puzzle interesting and different. So, those are the reprises. But adding reprises does more than just help make some neat puzzles. It amplifies the experience of one of the core values of the gameplay, which is to observe and appreciate the varying rules of time and their consequences. When you see the same level in a new world and have to think about a familiar thing in a new way, this shines a light on the differences. And since the differences are caused by the behavior of time, this highlights the behavior of time in an extra way, beyond what happens when you just play an arbitrary level in the new world. Reprises were also good for the thematics of the game. Having the same levels show up repeatedly felt dreamlike, and similar to the structural repetition of the story screens. I enjoyed the feeling of important levels echoing forward through the game. A fundamental dilemma arose with regard to the reprises as development proceeded. Early on, with The Pit, for example, I would just copy the entire level from one world to another, and maybe tweak a monster position or something, but the level was visually recognizable as exactly the same. You could take screenshots of different versions of the level, and they were barely different, and this felt important to me for recognizability. But when we started adding all the graphics, each world attained its own visual identity, and then there was a problem. I want the reprise levels to look exactly the same as each other to help maximize the feeling of recurrence, but the visuals of each world are very different from each other. So if the reprises look the same across worlds, they break the visual continuity internal to each world. They feel like they're interrupting, maybe so much that the player won't get a solid feeling of each world being an intact, consistent thing. And that's bad, because it would weaken the picture of the game being organized as a series of parallel worlds where time has consistent rules in each world. Because we're just talking about how levels look in a way that doesn't affect rules of the game, some mechanics-focused designers might minimize the importance of this question. But it's crucial to understand there are two different things going on here. There's the degree to which the game is coherently organized, worlds arranged in parallel with specific rules operating in each world. And then there's also the degree to which the player is able to see this organization, to appreciate and delight in it. My job as a designer is to help players see and delight in these structural arrangements. Because design is by default invisible, it is a common failure mode to design something that players are not sufficiently able to see and appreciate. So I wanted to be extra careful about this. The alternative choice, was to decorate each instance of a reprising level according to the visual theme of the world it's in, which de-emphasizes the repriseness a bit. This is the way I went, and it still feels like the right decision to me. Often in game design, you run into problems like this, where you're trying to do two things, and those two things are fighting each other. These are problems you have to solve, but sometimes no solution seems good, and the fact that you can't make a perfect decision becomes one of the things that makes development psychologically difficult. You're investing so much energy trying to make the game as good as possible, and the ideas were so beautiful when they were abstract in your mind. But that's because early abstractions don't have enough concrete details to generate the real conflicts that will eventually occur.
最后这句话又很有深意。乍一看这种想法很不错，当你实际去实施了，才发现很多东西都是有问题的。这是灵感 Chris Moore。大概看一下有多少多啊、有一部分其实已经看过了，是吧？这个我记得已经算相对偏短的了吧？哦，上不去。我操，好像也不是很短，这么夸张了？啊，这个本身也是个解谜是吧？还不会还能再过去吗？我操！我操，这么长 ！That's beyond shocking。然后底下也是有的，居然还有2片拼图，这能上去吗？这应该最里面了。哇，每个人都能讨论这么多，我操 ！Really scary, mate。啊，这应该能拼起来了。我觉得有一片应该能拼起来了。还是说这个拼图是不会 click 的？我感觉他上来根本就不想让你完全拼起来，就这样，5片拼图上来说应该是16分之5的话，一半这肯定没有，对，一半肯定没有，可能真的差不多要打20系，先这样。